Hi, everybody, and welcome to the course of World History. I am your host, Mr. Samuelson, and today we are talking about the spirit of the Renaissance. In particular, we're looking at the essential question of what events triggered the Renaissance and how was the Renaissance a rebirth. So let's start off by talking about the 14th century or the 1300s in Europe, because this was not a great time to be in Europe. Things were going pretty bad. Wages for people who were fortunate enough to make a wage were in decline. Food prices were increasing. This was leading to starvation, which weakens your immune system and makes you susceptible to all kinds of horrible things. But then a great thing happened for Europe. The Black Death showed up and killed off a third of the population. Why is that a great thing? It shouldn't be a great thing, right? But in a way it was. Let's look for silver linings here. Because this loss of population meant that society had to change. You lose a third of your population, almost half your population in areas. You need to make some serious reforms to make sure your society doesn't completely collapse. And one of the things that they did, one of the changes that happened, was an increase in wages. There are fewer employees that are available. The employees then become very valuable. That's economics, right? Supply and demand. The supply of workers went down. You're going to have to pay them more to come work for you. Also, less food is required. There's fewer people to feed. So the ones who are left are not starving anymore. There's more than enough food being supplied, so much so that we don't need as much farm labor anymore, which means people can move to cities and look at other professions. And this causes a breakdown in the feudal system. There are fewer serfs needed on the farms. More serfs are leaving the farms. They're going to live in cities and establishing this new life and realizing that they don't need serfdom. They don't need feudalism in order to survive in this world anymore. And they begin to rebel against the institutions of feudal society. Now, this will be part of what makes Europeans open to a Renaissance. People begin to question these ideas that had been a bedrock of their life for almost 1,000 years in the Middle Ages. They start to look to the past for a better society. What existed before this whole feudal system that we all live in now? Was there a better model? Is there a better way to live? So people look to art and science and literature, philosophy of ancient Greece and Rome. And this becomes the avenue for the rebirth of culture. Because when we talk about the Renaissance, we talk about the rebirth. We're talking about the rebirth of these ancient Greek and Roman ways of living, when things were better in Europe. Now, the Renaissance we can pin down to really beginning in Italy around 1350 CE, particularly in the city of Florence, which is pictured right here, the Florentine Renaissance or the Italian Renaissance. Now, for 250 years, Europeans will idolize the culture of Rome and Greece. Okay, this is how civilized societies are supposed to live. And people see that gap as a time of ignorance. This is where that name, Dark Ages, really comes from. That idea that there was this period where society was less. There was Rome and Greece, and then there's now, and this whole middle period, which is also, the Dark Age for that lack of learning. Now, one of the changes that helps to drive the Renaissance is this idea of humanism. Now, during the Middle Ages, the Catholic Church always encouraged people to focus on the afterlife. Lead a good life, a moral life. Yes, a difficult and a hard life, but you will be rewarded for that in the afterlife. Suffer now, be rewarded later. And humanists wanted to change this idea a little bit. Humanists encouraged people to make the living world better. They weren't against the Catholic Church. They weren't saying that the Catholic Church's teachings were wrong and that heaven doesn't exist. No, nothing like that. They're just saying, while we're on earth, we can do things to make our life on earth better. We should be focused on things like happiness. We can and should be happy on earth. And societies need to be able to do things that support the happiness of people. And they rooted this in the relative happiness of the ancient Greek and Roman societies and in their writings and learning about how the Romans lived, with their colosseums and their chariot races and entertainment. Now, in order to regain this ancient living, this ancient life, learning and education become increasingly important. See, at this time, Middle Ages, almost nobody read. There was close to 0% literacy. Only members of the church could read. Not even nobles could read. So we need to increase that. We need to increase our knowledge of the world in order to make the world a better place. So education becomes that key. And in the Renaissance, men in particular are expected to know how to read and discuss ancient Greek and ancient Roman literature. You have to learn Greek and Roman, in addition to whatever language prevailed in your area of Europe at the time. But in addition to knowing languages and literature, a Renaissance man was expected to be knowledgeable in all things, with specific focuses in art and science. You should be able to discuss a painting or a play and its artistic values. You should be able to discuss the scientific learning of the time. You should know a musical instrument, or at least be able to sing. You should have strong social skills. You should know how to navigate a party in a situation, talk to the right people about the right thing at the right time in order to advance your interests. You should be physically strong and healthy. Exercise is important for a Renaissance man. And you should know how to ride a horse and swing a sword. You should be a martial individual who can go off to war and defend your country when called upon. And that was the idea of a Renaissance man, not a specialist, but somebody who could do everything well. In addition to Renaissance men, there were Renaissance women, yes. Renaissance women amongst the highest class in society, the nobles. Renaissance women were as well educated as men. Renaissance women were, because of this education, or maybe they were educated because of it, they were expected to be able to take over the leadership of nations or cities or manors when needed. If the men go off to war, it is the women who rule in their absence. Now, one of the best known examples of a Renaissance woman was in the Italian Renaissance, Isabella d'Este, this woman right here. She was highly educated, a noted singer, and she ruled an Italian city-state for years as her husband went off fighting wars and doing other things. Isabella d'Este was the example of a Renaissance woman, certainly not the only one out there. There are several of other examples, Catherine of Aragon, and some others as well. So that was it for today. I do hope you learned something about the spirit of the Renaissance. We'll be looking a little bit more about the Renaissance in a future lesson, but that's it for today. Thank you very much for joining me, and farewell.